All right, let's roll on a Wednesday morning. A little bit of a unique position for us here, but I think we did this last year, the year before, and it was enjoyable doing it. I feel like last year, the year before, we might have done two live streams on signing day, like one at 8 and one at 10 or something like that. Decided just to go with one this year. To get a little bit of live Pitt sports talk in the morning. Go here at 10 a.m. Looks like Pitt's recruiting class is signed. 20 recruits total signing with the Panthers today. The 19 that we talked about on the morning Pitt this morning, and then one surprise that we will definitely talk about here. But it's a big day. It's signing day. If you listen to the morning Pitt this morning, I kind of talked about, well, maybe it's lost a little bit of the luster, or it's not as signing day is not as big of an event as it used to be, or people have faded on recruiting for a lot of reasons, largely the transfer portal. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I think it's still a big deal. And I think you see all the activity on social media this morning. We see all the activity on the message boards this morning. Certainly, if you look at the front page of Panther-Lair.com, we are loaded with content there. It's still a big deal. Getting recruits, high school recruits, is still a pretty big deal. And this is the day when it all happens. This is the day when it all comes together, that you sign them. And so Pitt, 20 recruits signed today. And that's what we're going to talk about here for, I don't know, an hour, 45 minutes, half hour, however long it is, however long we feel like talking about the recruiting class. That's what we'll do here on the Panther-Lair signing day live stream. Pat Narduzzi is going to have his press conference at noon today. We'll have coverage of that. And also kind of a unique situation. It didn't used to be unique, but it's been unique compared to the last few years. We'll get a chance to talk to Pitt's assistant coaches today, some of them at least, and get their takes on the recruits. I always like doing that. Narduzzi gives an overview of each guy in the class, and that's interesting to hear from. You get good stories and breakdowns there. But talking to the position coaches about the guys at their positions is when you can really get some insight on the recruits. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from those guys. Hopefully, hopefully we'll get as many of them as possible, because Pitt signed recruits at every position: offensive line, defensive line, receiver, running back, tight end, quarterback, both defensive backfield spots, the corners and the safeties, and linebackers. So really, I'd be happy talking to every Pitt assistant coach today, because I have a question for each of them. And in some cases, like Jeremy Darvo, I have 4 questions for him, because he's got 4 offensive line recruits in this class. So that'll be interesting. We'll have coverage of that live as it happens on Panther-Lair.com, and we'll have the video up later here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Just real quick, because I haven't plugged it a lot recently, but when you subscribe to YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, you can turn on notifications. So when we have a live stream like this one, that's sort of off schedule, not our normal live stream schedule, you'll know it because you get a notification sent to your phone when you're subscribing. You turn on notifications. Likewise, tonight, our live stream, instead of being at 8:30, is going to be at 8 o'clock, because Pitt basketball plays at 9:15. We don't really want to overlap with the Pitt basketball game for the last 15 minutes of the podcast. So we're going to go live at 8 o'clock, me and Jim Hammett tonight. And, that's a time change from what we usually do. If you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, turn on notifications, then you'll get an alert, let you know, hey, they're starting at 8, not 8:30. So do that. Like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm going to take a question right off the bat. If you want to ask questions about Pitt's recruiting class, you got comments on Pitt's recruiting class, get in the chat screen right over there to your right. And of course, as always, if you want to make sure we read your comment or answer your question, go be a super chatter, click the $sign down there, kick a couple bucks to the podcast. And, we appreciate your support. We'll definitely get to your comment or your question. For now, we'll start out with Adam Vinchik, which is the big question of the day, really. How do you feel about the new running back recruit? And so this was the surprise of the day. If you listen to the Morning Pitt this morning, you should still do that, because we break down the whole class and kind of talk about signing day in general. We talked on the Morning Pitt about 19 commitments. There were 19 guys we expected them to sign. And then when it as the morning started unfolding, and actually it was around 1 a.m. last night on the message boards, John Garcia, one of our national analysts at Rivals, came on the boards and said, hey, keep an eye on this Florida running back. And the Florida running back's Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown goes to Cardinal Newman. It's in West Palm Beach. Maverick Grazio went to school there. So it's a school that Pitt's somewhat familiar with. Pitt offered Jaylen Brown back in January, but he committed to Louisville in June, and that seemed to sort of take him off the list. And Pitt has 2 other running backs in the class. They got 2 receivers. They're fairly, and at one point they had like 6 offensive skill guys in the recruiting class. That we figured they would end up signing 4 of them. And that's how it looked yesterday. And so there wasn't much attention paid to Jaylen Brown after he committed to Louisville. Well, last month, or really in the last couple of weeks, he backed off that commitment to Louisville. However that happened, he said there was a lot behind the scenes, didn't necessarily feel like he was, wanted there anymore or something to that effect. So he reopened his recruitment, and one of the first schools that reached out was Pitt. Lindsey Lamar, the running backs coach, made contact. Brown had a good relationship with Lamar and Cade Bell, the offensive coordinator, when he was, before he committed to Louisville. He had a good connection with those guys. And so once he came back on the market, Pitt was back in contact. And, Lamar reached out, Bell was talking. He had sort of kept an eye on Pitt. Brown had through the season. Obviously, you're going to draw a lot of attention when you're 7-0 and the success they're having, particularly if you're a running back recruit. You're going to draw, you're going to be paying attention to what Desmond Reed is doing and how the offense is using him. And so it made it sort of a natural fit. And this morning, Jaylen Brown signed with Pitt. Now, Brown is sort of unique as a running back recruit, compared to what we've seen. They have 2 running backs in this class, Sinquan Smith and Ja'Karian Turner. Obviously, you can look at Desmond Reed, who they brought in. And they're smaller guys. Jaylen Brown's a little bit bigger. He told me he's 5'11", 193. And when you watch his film, I think he looks like a bigger back than what we've seen this staff go after. And certainly after what we've seen this staff sign so far, he's got more size. I don't know if I'd call him a power back. Somebody in the message boards pointed out he could probably get to 200 pretty easily if he's 193 right now. And I think that's probably true. And, in a college strength training program with nutritionists and everything, you're probably going to be able to maintain the speed even when, even if you add that weight. And Jaylen Brown does have speed. Along with his size, he's got good speed. And he told me he runs a 10.7 in the 100, a 4.49 40-yard dash. Those numbers, I mean, that's, you never know when recruits tell you numbers like that. I think somebody said they found online he ran a 10.88 in the 100. Either way, I mean, if you're going 10.88 or 10.7 in the 100 at 5'11", 193, you're moving. And when you put on Jaylen Brown's film, when you watch him play, yeah, he's moving. He's got good speed. He runs away from guys. He's able to run over some tackles, and he runs away from guys once he gets into the open field. This year for Cardinal Newman, he had 1,098 yards on 132 carries. That's better than 8 yards per carry. He scored 16 touchdowns. He had 5 games out of 11 where he ran for more than 100 yards, averaged just a touch under 100 yards per game. Also caught a couple passes, had a receiving touchdown, averaged about 13 yards per catch. He's a good player. He's a good running back. And like I say, he's a little bit different from the other guys they signed in this class and the guys that they have, like a guy like Desmond Reed, who is, again, that smaller kind of back. I think there's been a feeling this year that Pitt needed a bigger back. Maybe Daniel Carter could have been that guy, but then he got hurt. Derek Davis has a little bit bigger size than Desmond Reed. So maybe a need for size. And again, I think Jaylen Brown, he's bigger than the guys they've got, but he's not necessarily a big power back. But I also don't know if a big power back really fits in this offense. I know you'd like to have it for 4th and 1, but if you're running it out of the shotgun all the time, then, I'm not sure it's a huge, Derek Davis almost scored on 3rd and goal from the 1, right? He did score, except Pat Narduzzi called a timeout. So I don't know. Like, I get the need, the desire for that big power back, but I'm not sure if I see it necessarily fitting with how they want to run this offense. They want speed. They want guys who can, when they get a hole or get a little bit of opening, they can take off and go the distance, who can catch passes and make plays in the passing game. And, that's what you look at what Desmond Reed did. That's basically the model for what they want at running back in this offense. Maybe a little bit more size, but, in terms of the skill set, that's the kind of guy they want. So interesting addition, late guy to add to the class, and you put it in the context too of having 2 running backs, Rodney Hammond and Montravius Lloyd, go in the transfer portal yesterday. In addition to Daniel Carter being out of eligibility, it leaves just 2 scholarship backs returning, potentially returning with Derek Davis and Juelz Goff. Again, there are 2 running backs in this class, but adding another guy, not the worst option. Now you've got, as it stands right now, you're projected to have 5 scholarship backs, on the roster in 2025, pending Derek Davis and his injury, what might come out of that. If he has to end up missing time into next season, because it looked like a pretty bad injury, I thought, that he suffered in that, I guess it was the Boston College game, right? So, you might be looking at 4 or 5 scholarship backs. Running back does tend to be that position where freshmen can contribute maybe quicker than any other position on the field, offense or defense. And so I don't know if you necessarily want to fill out your entire roster with freshman running backs. You still might kick the tires on a transfer if you can find a good one for cheap. But if you need to use freshmen, it's not the worst thing. Freshman running backs have succeeded in college, and I think it's I think it's a you don't want to go into it relying on those guys, but I think you can use them if you need to. Scott Mitchell says, against my better judgment, I'm listening to Pitt football talk, but that's how good you are at it, Chris. Thanks for everything you do. Scott, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Look, the great thing about signing day, and I've always said this, and this is the great thing about following recruiting, is it's all about the promise of the future. These are the guys who are going to make you great down the road. So even if you're, I always say there's like 2 reasons that signing day is so appealing or so attractive, and it appeals to everybody, all across the spectrum of college football. If your team was really good, signing day is the day where you sign the guys who are going to help you stay good. And if your team stunk, signing day is the day where you're going to bring in the guys who will make you better. So everybody wins on signing day. Everybody's a national champion on signing day. It might not be what it was 20 years ago, but it's still a pretty big day. And Scott, even after a rough end of the season, hey, you got the promise of a better tomorrow. Look at these DBs. Look at this quarterback. Look at these running backs, So it's always good. DC3 says, always nice to flip a player from a conference foe. Nice addition to the class, the Desmond Reed effect. He was committed to Louisville. He decommitted and ended up going to Pitt. I don't know if I call it a straight flip or a steal or whatever it was. For whatever reason, he didn't feel welcome at Louisville anymore. Louisville obviously has some really talented young running backs. So maybe the situation didn't look as appealing, but there was a pretty decent stretch of this calendar year where Jeff Brom felt like he was a guy who could play in the Louisville offense. And I tend to trust Jeff Brom's evaluations on things. He's pretty good at his job. So if he liked this guy enough to take a commitment from him, I'm willing to go for it. Beacom 56 says, what did this class tell us about what type of players Cade Bell is looking for on offense? That's an interesting question, because it is always, I think we did a morning pit back in the spring saying, what did Cade Bell's initial quarterback offers tell us about what kind of quarterback he was looking for? They ended up signing Mason Heinschel, a guy that Bell offered in February. Heinschel then visited in March and committed at the end of that month. But there were like a handful of guys that Bell offered, and they all were sort of the same mold of quarterback, not necessarily the biggest drop back pro style passers, but usually guys who had mobility. Almost every quarterback that he really seemed to prioritize, and there were about 4 or 5 of them, I would say, in January and February, they all had that mobility, and so Mason Heinschel threw for 35 touchdowns, but he also ran for 6 and almost 800 rushing yards this year as a senior, just in one season. That's the kind of player Mason Heinschel is, a guy who can do design runs and a guy who can, when the play breaks down, he can take off, and calls himself an improviser, and that's the kind of thing he can do. And that was what most of the guys were that Bell went after. And so I always think recruiting is interesting as sort of a barometer of what a staff is looking for. Sometimes it'll reflect what they feel like the roster needs the most, and sometimes it'll just reflect the types of players they want. On the morning pit today, I talked a lot about defense, or about the defensive guys, the corners, the safeties, the linebackers in this class, and really over the last 4 or 5 classes, where I think this staff has really honed in and gotten laser focused on what they want, what types of players they want, physically, mentally, all of that, who they're looking for, and what kinds of guys they're looking for. And we've seen it sort of year after year, from Kyle Lewis to the Biles Lovelace Bass class, to last year's recruiting class of linebackers this year with Manny Taylor and Justin Thompson. I mean, you're seeing similar types, not all exactly the same, but similar types of players. So you're getting a real sense of what they want at linebacker. And I think we can definitely extrapolate a few things about Pitt's offense, as you're asking. quite frankly, I mean, I think the receivers and running backs, the running backs, Saquon Smith and Ja'Carrion Turner, set Jaylen Brown aside since he's a little bit bigger, but he's still got that speed. And then the receivers, Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates. I mean, the first thing that stands out to you about all these guys is speed, the ability to get into the open field and take off. That if they get an opening, they get some daylight, they're able to get big plays out of it. And that was the case. I mean, for Kinsler and Yates, I mean, Kinsler was a 1,000-yard receiver this year, had 1,300 all-purpose yards last year. Bryce Yates was a really productive receiver last year. This year, his team just put the ball in his hands as a quarterback, and he threw for 2,000 and ran for a bunch more. One of these situations where this is the best player on the team, got to put the ball in his hands. It was the same thing with Sean Lee, who's coming to Pitt to play cornerback from Harrisburg. That's what they did with him last year. Just put the ball in his hands and let him go make plays. And that's what he did, and was one of the most dynamic playmakers in the state. And so that's what you see, I think, first of all, is, Smith, Turner, Kinsler, Yates, not big guys. Guys whose their size is comparable to that Western Carolina mold, that Desmond Reed, Raphael Williams, Sincere Lee mold size-wise, and then also the explosiveness that those guys have. That's what you see in this group. I'll tell you what's interesting, though. Max Hunt, the tight end commit from Tampa, guy who signed today, 6'4", 6'5", probably around 215 or 220, somewhere around there. He's really played as like a big receiver at his high school, at Plant High School. Caught about 50-some passes over the last 2 years, decent number of touchdowns, productive, but mostly played as sort of a big receiver. And I think if there's one thing that Cade Bell might have felt like he was missing from this year's offense in terms of a weapon or a type of weapon or a style of weapon, I think it might have been that big receiver playing tight end. Like tight ends could typically be either a big receiver or like a small tackle, right? To be completely like overly simplistic and reductive, that's often what it boils down to. And I think they like having the small tackle, but more often than not, they want that big receiver. You look at Gavin Bartholomew, actually, let me bring up his, I want to bring up this one stat about him real quick. Because I think it's relevant for what this staff did with Gavin Bartholomew. So Gavin Bartholomew this season was on the field for, according to Pro Football Focus, 420 passing plays. Okay, he was on the field for 420 passing plays, either dropbacks, throws, whatever it may be. 420 passing plays. Out of those 420, Gavin Bartholomew stayed in the block 17 times. 17 times. That's not an exaggeration. And almost half of those, 8 out of those 17, were in the final 3 games when they had offensive line issues. The first, 9 games, he only did it 9 times. That, I think, is really indicative of the type of what they want the tight end to do in this offense. And I think it's part of the reason they were so excited about Jake Arenda in the spring, is because he was that big receiver, an athletic guy who could split out wide. And yeah, he was a tight end, but he's also kind of playing wide out, but he's bigger. And so that's what he's doing. He's not staying in the block. He's not an extra lineman. He's not a small tackle. He's a big receiver. And Max Hunt, I think, reflects that. And I think, particularly with Jake Arenda out, I don't think, and with Malachi Thomas not ready to go yet as a true freshman, I kind of feel like they probably felt like they didn't have that kind of guy. Now, we might get a chance to talk to Jacob Bernowski, the tight ends coach here, later today, and I'll ask him a question along these lines, and maybe he'll be like, no, that's not it at all. And I'm completely wrong. But when I look at what they did with Bartholomew, how they used him, what they said about Jake Arenda in the spring, and then this tight end that they're bringing in, Max Hunt, it all sort of points toward wanting a tight end who's maybe going to be lined up in line, but a lot of times going to be lined up out in the slot or lined up out wide. Let's look at Gavin Bartholomew's snap breakdown. He had, I would say, an almost equal split. Yeah, a little bit favoring lining up in line versus the number of snaps that he played in the slot or out wide. Most of his snaps were in line, but he ran pass routes on those. But they definitely put him out. According to Pro Football Focus, he was in line for about 350 snaps and he was going out wide for about 280, either going out wide or lining up in the slot. I think that's how they want to use the tight end, and I think that's what Max Hunt sort of represents. So to your question about what does this class tell us about the type of offense that Cade Bell wants, or the type of players Cade Bell wants? I think that's one of the biggest indicators, is getting a tight end like that who will be able to go out and run. Thomas Keene says only one kid from Western PA. Yeah, that's the truth. Pitt tough guy Shep Turk from Thomas Jefferson is the one Western PA prospect. And I want to read this next comment because it ties into it. Pitt tough guy says it seems to be a down year for Western PA recruits generally, not just at Pitt. Is this a trend or is it a one-off? Yeah, I looked at the Rivals rankings, the top 30 prospects in the state of Pennsylvania, and there were only 10 in the top 30 from Western PA. So 10 out of the top 30 prospects in the state were from Western PA. I got to think that's one of the lowest totals we've seen in quite some time. Shep Turk ranked in at number 29. He was the number 10 prospect in Western PA, number 29 prospect in the state. But it sort of says something when it says something when, only a third of the top 30 prospects in the state are here in Western Pennsylvania. Most of those guys in the top 10 are from Eastern PA. I don't know if there's been a talent shift. I don't know if, some of you have like a couple of those schools in the Philly area that seem to have a bunch of guys with New Jersey mailing addresses on their, whatever it may be. Yeah, I don't think it's a great year in Western PA. I think they're good players for sure. I think, a guy like Bradley Gompers is probably going to be really good in college, sticking with Duke after getting some late push from Penn State and a couple others. Might be the top guy in the region probably. But yeah, it does seem to be a little bit down. And that's it's something that I think Pitt has had to deal with for a while. And the problem is not just that, like the problem is sort of twofold or threefold, depending on how you look at it. One, if the overall numbers are, they're never going to get clean sweeps in Western PA. Dave Wanstead never even got clean sweeps in Western PA. There were always guys who got away. And we could go down the list year by year of even when Wanstead was recruiting at his peak. I mean, 2006, he killed it in Western PA with Doran Dickerson and Jason Pinkston and Justin Hargrove and John Malecki and all these guys. And he still missed on Darren Walls went elsewhere. And I forgot, there were a couple other guys in that class. And year after year, there were top-ranked guys locally who left to go to Penn State, or they went to Michigan, or they went to Ohio State, or they went to Notre Dame. They never got everybody they wanted in Western PA. So, if you take your stack of Western PA recruits in any given year, you're going to miss on some of them. You know what I mean? Maybe not half, let's say a third. Okay. A third, you're just not going to get. So if there were 12 targets in Western PA, now you're down to 8, right? Now the problem is, if instead of 12 targets, now there are 9, now you're down to only 6, right? Who are sort of available for you. And so the numbers go down, as the overall numbers go down, the number that are actually like available to you that you might land also goes down. And so it's, and as the numbers of like quality D1 prospects locally go down, Pitt's target numbers go down, they offer fewer guys, they land fewer guys, and you end up with a class like this where they only have one Western PA kid. I think it's been a long time. I think Pat Narduzzi and his staff have understood for a long time that they can't rely on Western PA, that they can't rely on just recruiting the WPIAL. And they've had to go outside. I mean, even Dave Wanstead knew he had to go outside the WPIAL. He had to go to New Jersey and Ohio and Maryland and D.C. Narduzzi has stretched more into Georgia than his predecessors did. Florida has always been an area that Pitt's gone. And I think that's what Narduzzi has just focused on is, you want to get those local guys if you can. But I think we all know a lot of the sort of complications that come with that. And so, and difficulties and challenges that come with recruiting locally. And so it's been an ongoing process for the last few years. And I don't see that changing. I mean, there's good recruits in the WPIAL for 2026 and 2027. Those classes that are coming up, they're good recruits. But I mean, How many realistically is Pitt going to get? Not sure what that number really is. So you've got to be able to build those relationships and connections in the other areas, in Georgia, in Florida, in the DMV, in North Carolina, down through the ACC footprint, and of course in Ohio, New Jersey. You've got to be able to get guys there. It's like a T, of like, let me see from your perspective, Jersey, PA, Ohio, down through the DMV and along the coast. I don't know if that lined up. I feel like we're backwards, although I don't know. But you get it. That's kind of the areas where Pitt has to emphasize. And apparently this year, Indiana. And they're trying in Texas too. I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, to go into Texas and recruit a lot. I don't know if you're going to get enough guys to justify the cost of going down there. There are enough players that you could, like a Florida or Georgia, that you could potentially get some good players out of, but it's cheaper and easier to get to in, Georgia and Florida. You're in the ACC footprint there. I know SMU's in the ACC now, but I'm not going to consider the state of Texas to be the ACC footprint. So I would say, I see what they're going for. I know they're trying, but just like California, I'm not really sure how much effort how much resources you need to commit to recruiting those states. Grant Sakuda asks, any thoughts on this year's O-line class? Seems like we have quantity, but not sure about the quality. They signed 4 guys, 2 tackles, 2 guards, one of them from Texas, one of them from Georgia. So that kind of, and one of them from England. Look, I don't know what to say about Pitt offensive line recruiting. They signed 5 guys last year. I think Caleb Holmes is one of the better offensive line recruits that Narduzzi has signed at Pitt. I think he'll be really good in that class this year. I don't know. I don't know what to make of these guys. Akram El-Nagmi, the kid from England, has been playing American football for like 2 years. So you might like the size, you might like the athleticism. He's a former rugby player, so there's toughness and all these things, and that's great, but he's been playing football for 2 years. Torian Chester is like a 6'3", 350-pound guard. You're going to have to do some work there, I think. Jordan Fields is a nice-looking tackle prospect. I think there's decent potential there. And then Shep Turk. I like Shep Turk. I keep saying this, and I know it's not a 100% proven commodity, but like if you tell me you've got a lineman from Thomas Jefferson that you feel is a D1 quality player, okay, I say take him. I think you go for TJ lineman as much as you can. You don't reach and take FCS guys or something like that. But if you've got a guy that you believe is an FBS player and he's a lineman at Thomas Jefferson, I think you go get him. That's me. That's just my opinion. I have a certain reverence for Thomas Jefferson, so I like that. But look, if you're Pitt, I think, and this is certainly a popular sentiment on the message boards, I think you have to attack the offensive line with numbers. I think you have to bring in a lot of guys. You're not going to get the 5-star offensive tackle who's going to be ready to play in year 1 or year 2. You're not. I think as you get into the upper echelon of offensive line recruits, you are, you get closer to the sure things. Nobody's a sure thing, but you get closer to the sure things. In the area of the stratosphere where Pitt recruits, you are further away from those sure things. And so I think, the way to kind of balance it out as you get further from the sure things is to take more guys. If you're going to have a 50% hit rate, and who knows if that's what it is, but let's say you have a 50% hit rate and you only sign 2 linemen. Now you've got 1 usable lineman. If you have a 50% hit rate and you sign 6 linemen, now you might have 3 usable linemen. And so I think as much as any other position, it makes sense that you would attack it with numbers because you need 5 of them on the field at one time. But as much as any other position group, it probably makes the most sense to over-recruit numbers-wise and find out who can play and adapt to the system and be usable after, after a year or 2 in the program. So it does seem like quantity. We'll find out about the quality, but while you wait to find out about the quality, hammering on quantity is probably not the worst idea. John Jingleheimer Schmidt says, if I know anything about recruiting, it's that one of these random 3-stars will turn into an all ACC performer, and one of these random fringe 4-stars will absolutely flop. Yep. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. I think that's probably the truest thing anyone will say today. Rich Campsey says strengths and deficiencies of this group of signees. That's a good question. Let's see. I think the back seven on defense is strong. I like all these corners, safeties, and linebackers. I'm pretty intrigued by the defensive ends too. I'll tell you. I think Denham Cook, he's like a 6'3", 240 pound, maybe 6'4", 6'3", 240-pound pass rusher at his high school. He's like a stand-up outside linebacker who rushes the passer. At his high school, he's going to play defensive end at Pitt. Super productive. I think he had 22 tackles for loss and like 15 sacks or something like that 2 years ago. This past year, he only played 5 games because he got hurt and still had, I think, double-digit tackles for loss and 3 sacks before he was lost for the season due to an injury. I think he's going to be pretty good. There's a couple guys that are sort of looking at position changes. Manny Taylor is sort of a wide receiver DB in high school. He's going to play linebacker at Pitt. And Julian Anderson is kind of a big athlete. Could even be a tight end. Could be like one of these rangy tight ends we're talking about. He's going to be a defensive end at Pitt. And I think there's interesting potential there. I think the corners and safeties are all really fast. I think there's a lot of good talent in that group. I mean, I think there's a lot to be excited about there. Would you ask strengths and deficiencies? As far as deficiencies, I mean, there's the O-line question. Numbers wise, 4 is a decent number, particularly after taking 5 last year. But kind of like we just said in the last question from whoever asked that, Grant Sakuda asked, I mean, we'll find out about the quality. We'll find out how good those guys are. Not really sure what to make of them until they get on the field, right? It might take a little bit of time. And then, defensive tackle, they signed 1 guy. They signed 3 last year in Jasir Whittington and Francis Brew and Ty Uhas. And that's good. And I think they've got a lot of good young defensive tackles on this team, but I don't think you really – I think if you could get another defensive tackle, it would probably have been worth it to do so and sign 4 defensive linemen in this class. We'll see about the receivers and running backs. I mean, like I said, I think there's a lot of speed and a lot of explosiveness and playmaking ability. Probably could use a little bit of size. Probably could, which I don't think they really got, particularly at the receiver position. I think they'll probably need to go to the portal for that. I think if they sign a wide receiver out of the portal, I think it would be ideal for it to be a bigger wide receiver. I don't think they need another guy who's the same size as Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee and Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates. I think they need a little bit of size. Kenny Johnson is a little bit bigger than those guys. Dejon Reynolds is a little bit bigger than those guys. I think you need someone else in that mold, if not bigger, just to add some variety to the group. It's the spice of life, and you can make things more challenging on defenses and create better matchups for yourself if you have sort of different types of players out there. And partially that's where the tight end element comes in as far as a big receiver, with the recruit coming in, and then maybe Jake Renda or Malachi Thomas, if those guys are ready to play in 2025. So maybe, not quite enough variety of the skill positions. As far as the deficiency, even though I really like those guys that they signed at receiver and running back. And then, just not really knowing what they got in the offensive line haul, aside from numbers. Jake Fasadi says the number one obstacle from recruiting Western PA is Terry Smith at Penn State. I mean, that's a big part of it. Terry Smith is really good at what he does, and he's been really good at what he does for a long time. But that's not all of it, because Pitt lost guys before Terry Smith went to Penn State. Pitt wasn't getting everyone out of the WPIAL when Terry Smith was still the head coach at Gateway. And I'm not even just talking about his guys at Gateway that didn't go to Pitt, because there were certainly a lot of them. It's part of it, but it's not everything. It's kind of like what we talk about with the reasons behind Pitt's 5-game losing streak. Injuries. Well, it's part of it, but it's not everything. The defensive collapses. Well, it's part of it, but it's not everything. Terry Smith being at Penn State, the impact on Pitt's WPIAL recruiting, it's part of it, but it's not everything. And there's one more who just came in. We just got a notification. This one was not on my radar at all. I'm going to find out who this is. Cameron Sapp. Cameron Sapp is a wide receiver. As we talk about needing wide receivers, Pitt has signed Cameron Sapp, a wide receiver from Palmetto High School in Florida. Let's look up his Rivals profile real quick. Did not see this one coming. Rivals lists him as a commitment to Florida Atlantic. Flipped his commitment, I guess late in the process. Today, seemingly. Lists offers from Georgia Tech, Maryland, Nebraska, Syracuse, Texas A&M, Utah, and West Virginia. Let's look up his stats real quick see if they've got it listed on his Max Preps page. Let me see what we can find out about Cameron Sapp. 3-star wide receiver prospect. That's not helping me. Let's bring up his huddle page, get some updated height and weight information. 5'9", 165, smaller receiver, as we've talked about. Let's see what kind of stats he was putting up here. Cameron Sapp had 2 rushing attempts for 37 yards, and he caught 44 passes for 607 yards and 8 touchdowns this season in total. Scored a total of 8 touchdowns, all receiving. And, we'll check out his film and kind of see what he looks like. But another small receiver, and I would say with a guy who, bring up his numbers again, averaged about 14 yards per catch. Small guy, yards after the catch. I'm guessing when we put on the film here, we're going to see a lot of speed and, get a kind of more an explosive playmaker in this class. So another surprise signing, kind of added it in here. I finally got his huddle film opened up, and we'll just see what his first play looks like as we take a look at this. He's just going to the end zone and beating double coverage in the end zone for a touchdown. So nice catch there for Cameron Sapp, joining Pitt's 2025 recruiting class. Another wide receiver, the third wide receiver in this class. As we talk about it, we had breaking news here, right here on the live stream. Jim is working to get a hold of Cameron Sapp right now as we speak. So we'll add one more guy to this recruiting class, bringing the total to 21. Like we said, Khalil Sterling, who was a wide receiver committed in the class, we do not expect to sign with Pitt today. We don't expect Pitt to sign him. So, if you were counting him on the receivers, it didn't exactly end up that way. But there's 3 receivers, 3 running backs now, with Tony Kinsler, Bryce Yates, joined by Cameron Sapp at wide receiver in this class, and then Saquon Smith, Jakarian Turner, and Jaylen Brown, the other surprise addition today at running back. 6 total offensive skill players in this recruiting class, a little bit of a rebuild there, but again, not really adding much in the way of size. Sapp, as I said, the newest commitment lists himself at 5'9", and that's sort of in line with where Bryce Yates is, where Tony Kinsler is. Those guys might be a little bit bigger. Let me see what Yates lists. Rivals, we list Yates as 6 foot. Kinsler, I think we list. Where is Kinsler on my list? There he is, 5'11". So, right around that same general area, probably 5'8" to 5'10" is what you're looking at with these wide receivers. Again, explosive players, good players, speed, and all those things, but, need a little bit of size at some point. And so I think that'll probably come from the portal. If they decide to pursue a wide receiver in the transfer portal, they might have enough numbers now between these guys and the guys that they brought in last year and the transfers and that kind of thing. They might have enough numbers that they don't need another wide receiver, but they certainly I think could use some size in this group, unless they plan to more prominently feature Deshaun Reynolds and Kenny Johnson in the offense next season. Johnson was obviously prominently featured, although I think he could have gotten even more than he did. And Reynolds, I think, was probably pretty underutilized. So interesting late additions today. 2 offensive skill guys, bringing the total number to 6, 3 receivers and 3 running backs. Let's see some more comments here. Jason Makel says Shep Turk was a Whippeal wrestling champion as a junior. Yeah, I think Shep Turk is going to be good. Big ass kicker from Thomas Jefferson. You always like to have those. Gerard Oliver says if Pitt can't get the best players out of the Whippeal, Harrisburg, York, and Lancaster has tons of talent, and this staff has only gotten 1 player out of this area once a year for 5 seasons. Yeah, well, they got Kenny Johnson's that general area, I think, right? And then Sean Lee this year, so that's 2. I agree, but the problem is, like, those are hard areas for Pitt to recruit. That Central PA and Eastern PA are tough areas for Pitt to recruit. It's the reality. It's always been tough to recruit against Penn State in those areas. And, there are no secrets about the players that live in Central PA and Eastern PA. Michigan knows about them. Notre Dame knows about them. Ohio State knows about them. Georgia knows about them. Texas A&M knows about them. Like, schools are coming in trying to get those guys. And so it's tougher and tougher. And Pitt has tried to make efforts to land guys from, Philly, South Jersey, Central PA, Eastern PA. They've tried and they've gotten guys every now and then, but for the most part, it's been an uphill battle. And you got to find the guys who are overlooked a little bit, like a Gavin Bartholomew, and then hope that they pan out. Hope your evaluation is right. Kenny Johnson wasn't really an overlooked guy. He was pretty well known and had a good offer sheet and good recruitment. But yeah, and they won that recruitment, and they were able to hold on to him. But it's just a tough place to recruit. I think there's a lot of guys, and there are talented players there. But whereas, like, if you go into Georgia, there's a ton of talented players that even after the SEC gets a lot of them, there's still a bunch that you can go get. That's not the case in Eastern PA and Central PA. The overall number of available talented players is lower. And so you could go out there, and it's not like it's just this overwhelming area of talent that there's just so many guys Penn State can't possibly take them all. It's a limited number, maybe more than there is in the Whippeal, but it's still a limited number. And that makes it tough to have a lot of success, because you're working from a smaller pool, and a lot of schools are going after kids out there. So they should try. I don't think there's any question about it. They should make the efforts. They should look at those guys. They should be in Eastern PA and Central PA and Philly. They should be in those areas, but it's tricky. I think it's tough. I think it's tough to get a lot done in the state of Pennsylvania right now if you're Pitt, with just kind of how recruiting has developed. All right. 45 minutes seems like a good spot. We're going to try and work on this Cameron Sapp story. And then, of course, we'll be in the South Side for Pat Narduzzi's. There's one more question. Pitt Fan 84 says, why is it seemingly impossible to recruit a good offensive lineman? I'm not talking All-American or even second team All-ACC, just an average lineman who can move his feet and arms. I mean, they've gotten some guys like that, right? Like, you think about some of the guys they've had: Carter Warren, Matt Gonsalves, Branson Taylor this year. They've gotten some guys like that. They haven't gotten enough because I think it's tough to get really good offensive line prospects. They've gotten some, though. It hasn't been impossible. It's just like I said, like, the upper echelon of offensive line prospects, the guys who are closer to being sure things, the guys who are, most likely to pan out as you're evaluating them coming out of high school, it's harder to get those guys. It's hard to get those guys unless you're in the upper echelon of the sport, right? For everybody else, the vast majority of college football, you're recruiting offensive linemen on, you're doing more sort of future guessing. You're relying more on projections, and you just never know. You could be really good at projecting, but you never know how a guy is going to adapt to college. The football side and the academic side, and just the life side of college. You never know how it's going to go when guys get into college. And you can have the surest thing ever, and it just doesn't pan out. And Pitt, when they're recruiting offensive linemen, they're not dealing with the surest things ever. They're dealing with guys that they need to hit right on, and it's hard to do that. And so you hope for a 50% hit rate. You might end up a little bit below that. But that's part of why I was saying, like, it's not the worst thing to go for quantity. You're not going to get, you're not going to recruit 3 guys with the certainty that at least 2 of them are going to pan out. So you probably need to recruit 4 or 5 most years, which they typically do. Recruit 4 or 5 and hope that 2 or 3 work out. So it's tough. I think it's one of the hardest positions to recruit. I think it's one of the hardest positions to get right on because you never know about anybody, but it's really tough, I think, with offensive line. So it's tricky. They've gotten good players. To your question, they've gotten good offensive linemen over the years, just not a lot of them, and they've had some misses. Final question, Sports Clips and Prediction 17 says, any word on Javian Hilson and where he's going? I'm not sure where he's going. I'm not sure if he's signed. I don't expect him to go to Pitt. 5-star defensive lineman who took a late official visit with the Panthers. I don't expect him to be at Pitt. The class is wrapped up. Pitt is finished at 21 with a couple of surprises coming in here this morning. So that's always exciting. Who knew that there would be surprises on signing day? Who knew that could still happen? But it can. It can. All right, we got Panther-Lair and Pitt assistant coaches at noon today. We'll have coverage of that on Panther-Lair.com and videos right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll have our live stream tonight at 8 o'clock to get you ready for Pitt, Mississippi State, recap the recruiting class and everything else going on in the world of Pitt sports. And then, lots of coverage right here at Panther-Lair.com. So stay tuned. Stay tuned to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And, of course, like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you have a great Wednesday signing day. Stay tuned for all the coverage from Panther-Lair.com. And we will talk to you tonight on the live stream. And then again tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.